What's going on, guys? Hope you're all doing well. Now for today's video, I wanted to talk about a Godzilla movie we never got to see. In 2016, Shin Godzilla, the popular Japanese revival of the iconic monster, came out to pretty much universal praise in its home country, but other territories were more mixed on the project. I think over here in the West, because we only had those early Showa movies to go off of what Godzilla was for 3 or 4 decades, the American audience in particular kind of expects Godzilla to be created through that specific lens. And Toho seemed to be pretty aware of that, so the idea to actually produce a follow-up to Shin Godzilla that would be more palatable to audiences that weren't necessarily 100% behind this version was drawn up quickly once that movie was coming to life. And this is the plan they eventually abandoned for it after the film came out. Now, before I go any further, I want to mention to you guys that this information can be found at Toho Kingdom, which states the following. Details regarding a proposal on a film called Shin Godzilla Raids Again can be found in Shin Ultraman Design Works. Hideaki Anno believed this proposal never moved forward because the pitch was premature, and it felt like a waste even submitting something that would never come to be. But Anno says that he is still aware that it all comes down to Toho, the company, as to whether or not the edit of Shin Godzilla would ever come to pass. Now, what he's talking about here is doing something that used to be common in the 1970s, where already made Godzilla movies would be edited and reissued under different names. On February 3rd of 2016, believe it or not, during Shin Godzilla's production, Hideaki Anno actually created what he called the sequel to Shin Godzilla memo proposal, called Shin Godzilla Raids Again, and outlined it as a Toho Champion Festival-style monster showdown. The small synopsis on the website reads, "The nation of Japan is caught in the middle of the radioactive rampage of Godzilla, a creature that defies all known laws of science, and it is not alone." So with that kind of ominous proposal and outline, it already sounds like the film was gearing up to be more than just Godzilla, and it may even have been influenced by the success of the 2014 Godzilla movie that had the monster show up and fight 2 other beasts in its plot. Anno's intention was for this sequel, which he dubbed Shin Godzilla Raids Again, to be an alternative for audiences who might not be very invested in the movie he initially made, mainly because it only featured Godzilla and no other monsters, which was something most people expected of a new Godzilla movie in the West. When Godzilla came out in 1998, Showa fans who didn't know much about the evolution of the series past Biollante, they generally hated it, and when Godzilla 2000 came out, they seemed to really embrace and love that for Orga being in the movie. Although in truth, the box office numbers kind of told a very different story, so it's almost like Japan was catering to their hardcore Godzilla audience and not the wider audience that something like the TriStar movie would do. So you've obviously got different films being made for different people there, but still, with the new MonsterVerse movie from 2014 at the time doing extremely well, I can see why Hideaki Anno would think that this would be a good idea. There's no real idea on whether or not Anguirus would show up, which I know that's going to be a question you guys ask because it was called Shin Godzilla Raids Again. Anyways, the film was supposed to be helmed by Shinji Higuchi, believe it or not, and had a 2018 release date in mind because it wouldn't be a project that would be too much time-consuming or expensive for Toho to make. My best guess is they would have done something similar to what the West did to the original Godzilla movie or Godzilla 1985. Basically, they take the base movie, trim a little bit out, and throw in some new stuff other audiences would want to see, mainly the big bad monster they wanted to put in there. That's just my best guess. So while it does look like it was being called a sequel, the actual idea, behind what they were basing the sequel outline on was reused footage and possibly even special effects work on set with additional battles or monster mayhem. So yeah, that sounds a lot like what they did in the 1970s, and those were actually full-fledged sequels, so who knows. Now, Anno handed over this idea and a rough outline alongside some image visuals to Shinji Higuchi and the company Toho as a gift. But once Shin Godzilla came out, the discussion surrounding the potential sequel project never really came to be, leaving the idea of a Shin Godzilla sequel dead in the water and abandoned for going on 8 years later. Now look guys, I know that the immediate idea most people think of with a sequel to Shin Godzilla would be those little monsters that seem to be coming out of its tail at the end of the 2016 movie. And don't worry, I'll do a whole video dedicated to them later on, but when it comes to this project itself, I don't really know what the plan was. Those little things are never mentioned, and believe it or not, Shin Godzilla as a design has actually been used within special short films for theme park rides and stuff like that in Japan, and they actually feature him alongside other monsters. So the idea and spirit of that sort of pitch, this Shin Godzilla Raids Again thing, it did live on in some regard, but when it comes down to the sequel itself, it just never happened and got released, you know, to other territories. Part of me wonders what it would have even been like if it did come to pass. Like, can you imagine watching a new Godzilla movie with a lot of recycled footage you just saw in the last movie, only kind of inverted or color graded different? Is that what it was going to be like? I don't know, but you know, that was the same way they used to do those things in the 1970s, which is what they based this idea off of when, you know, they would reuse footage of monster fights in later films. You'd be like, hey, I think I've seen Anguirus do that move shot exactly the same way in an earlier movie. Oh, hey, it is the same scene. It's just they cut it out of one thing and put it in another. I think it sounds interesting, but I also think it would have been a better idea if they just went all out and made a full-fledged movie with completely original content. There's no real word on what the monster would be, like I said, or even if this would be some sort of continuation of where that last movie immediately left off. But whatever it was, it didn't happen. So that is something to consider as well. Personally, I kind of don't like the way Toho has approached Godzilla's continuity over the last couple of decades, because I actually enjoy follow-ups in a, you know, concrete timeline that spans several years. The Heisei series did that excellently, and it wasn't until the Millennium era that we started to get random one-off sequels that didn't have any continuation, and they didn't even have relation to the immediate movie that came out like the year before, apart from the two Mechagodzilla movies, which I thought was interesting. But in the end, Shin Godzilla Raids Again never happened, and it just sits as another abandoned idea from Japan that we may never get to see. Anyways, guys, those are all just my own thoughts on the subject matter. What do all of you think? Would you like to see this ever get made, or would you like to see something completely different? I've given my own thoughts, but hey, whatever your own happen to be, I'd love to hear all about them in the comments down below.